CSI Unplugged is the 16th episode of the 12th season of CSI, and there will be spoilers as I talk about various things in this episode. And I did enjoy this. The story really appealed to me. I wasn't sure, however, if I'd enjoy how dimly lit it was, but actually, after maybe 10-15 minutes, I became used to it and I almost forgot that it was dimly lit because the power goes out everywhere and they're having to try and solve this crime, a race against the clock, with the power out. And they do get creative in some ways, and it was pretty interesting. And we also have Hodges and Henry stuck in an elevator, and the story didn't need to see them more than we did. But personally, I would have liked to have seen them a little bit more. I just thought their scenes were fantastic. But the main narrative focuses on a little boy who has gone missing. His nanny is also missing. And there's a lot of blood in the boy's bedroom. And it's unclear what has happened. And as I said, there will be spoilers as I discuss things in this that I particularly enjoyed, things that I thought worked really well. And what I loved about this is that it could have been any one of a number of suspects, but actually, I initially did work it out. As I said, spoilers so I can talk freely about this. When we first met the character of the psychic, I decided that they weren't giving the character enough attention. And because they weren't really pointing fingers at her, I started to point fingers at her. It's a common thing with crime shows and crime dramas. If there's somebody involved, but they don't get that much screen time, it might mean, not always of course, but it might mean that they're the suspect because it comes as an element of surprise. We've already met the character, so it's not somebody completely out of the blue, but it's somebody we haven't really looked at, so we weren't necessarily being primed to expect that reveal. But the downside here is that when you watch this many crime shows and crime dramas, you do learn to suspect the characters who are not getting the main attention. But of course, that's not always the case. It wasn't guaranteed. But on this particular occasion, I did think that there was something about her character that was very suspicious. I think the main thing for me is when she referred to the boy's father as to TC as my husband. I think that was what she said. And it's because she was, in her words, or in her defence, still channeling his dead wife. But I feel like that slip of the tongue ties in so nicely to what we ultimately learn about the character. Had she not said that, maybe I wouldn't have focused so much on the character, but that definitely made me quite suspicious. And ultimately what happened to her character, I thought was the perfect way for that to go. And of course, what happened to the little boy definitely played out well. I'm not saying that they can't kill children in dramas, but unless it's a show entirely about the death of a child, I think it's always more satisfying for a viewer if you have a missing child who is then found, found alive, of course, unless they're found dead earlier on in the episode and you have time to process the grief with the other characters, in which case it becomes a different story. But if the body comes up at the end of the episode and then that's it, I think that's kind of a really heavy way to end an episode without allowing the viewer any time to process the grief with the characters. So had that been the case, I'm not saying it would have been a bad thing necessarily for the narrative. It certainly would have been shocking, but I think in terms of the way the viewer feels after watching the episode, having the child found alive was absolutely the right way to go. And the moment where he ran towards his father, that got me. I definitely started to well up at that point, and obviously it's such a beautiful way to end things, and I thought it was a really great narrative. As I said, when I started watching it, I realised the power was out. I don't like films or shows that are dimly lit. I don't like having to strain my eyes. I just don't tend to enjoy them. I find that films and shows can be just as suspenseful, even when things are quite well lit. A lot of horror films, for example, will just basically turn the lights out. And it's just annoying. I don't find it scary. I just find it irritating. But actually with this, because they were quite clever with it, we had various different light sources. It didn't feel like I was completely straining my eyes. And by the time the lights came on, towards the end of the episode, I almost forgot we were watching an episode with the lights out. It became really natural. So that's definitely not something that became a problem, even though I thought it was going to be. So that was great as well. CSI Unplugged is definitely a brilliant episode, a great narrative. I think everything went in the right direction. All of the conclusions were perfect for the narrative, and they even managed to take a dimly lit episode and make it work well. So nothing but praise from me. CSI Unplugged is definitely an episode that I enjoyed.